So you've probably heard of something called open source technology. You've probably even used some open source projects like Kubernetes, for example. But when you think about those projects, do you ever think about the hundreds, if not thousands of developers that actually go ahead and contribute into those projects? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today here on Cloud with Chris. Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you folks for joining here today. As you heard in the intro, we've got a very exciting session here today, talking all about really the lessons learned from cultivating open source projects and communities. So I think we often think about the technologies themselves that we use rather than the people who tirelessly, I should say, work to go and make sure that those projects are maintained, well operated, and that our contributions get into the projects that we eventually use. So really pleased about the session that we've got today. I am going to be joined by JJ Asghar, who is going to be talking about his experiences working with some of these open source projects. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce JJ to the show here. Hey, JJ, how are you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
All good, thank you. All good. Thank you so much for joining. I think we've got a really super topic here today to talk.
Yeah, no, it's I'm real excited about this. I'm very passionate about this topic because arguably it's how I built myself up in the industry, and I've seen some really great successes and some horrible failures. It's good to at least vocalize these things so whoever's watching or whoever's trying to learn from this, they don't step on those or trip on those branches or landmines, however you want to describe the problems out there.
Bearing your battle scars. Got it. Excellent.
Exactly.
So I guess then you mentioned there a minute ago that you've had your own experiences with the open source community. So let's maybe expand on the intro first for folks who may not know you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Hi, I'm JJ, and I'm a developer advocate for the IBM Cloud. I really do have the address of awesome@ibm.com.
That is quite literally awesome. I have to jump in with that.
If you know anything about IBM, one of the most famous things they have is getting your email is actually one of those things that gets stuck to you for your whole life. So if you leave IBM or come back, they always give you the same stuff.
Okay.
Well, I found the paperwork to change my email address and get an alias, and I had 5 different ones. So I put all like the ones you have like for GitHub and things like that. And then I had one extra one, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to put awesome down. And a little window popped up and said, please put a business justification in for this. And it was the only one that ever asked me for it. Yeah. And I was like, because I'm awesome. And 24 hours later, they gave it to me. I'm like, all right, cool.
I love that. I love that was the business justification. I love somewhere that's in a system of record being like, this is why we've got that email address. That again, exactly. That is awesome.
Thank you. But yes, so I spent a lot of time in the OpenStack community. Before that, I helped out a small Linux distribution called CRUX, which is a BSD style ports tree on top of the simple just a basically kernel. It was really stripped down. And then recently I've spent a lot of time in the Kubernetes, Tekton, Istio communities. Yep. And now I'm spending a lot of time, if you notice behind me, there's over there you go. There's a little red hat. There's a little red hat over there because IBM and Red Hat are pushing strongly for OpenShift. Yep. And I've learned the beauty of OpenShift and how that stuff kind of works.
OpenShift is an awesome set of technologies for any enterprises who want to go and build upon those Kubernetes building blocks, I guess. And I think that's probably a session we could do entirely on its own as well, right? So we'll scope it down, I think, away from that one. But I'm sure we can get you on again to talk more about that. But today we're here to talk all about open source projects and some of those lessons learned. And I think, again, the thing that I'm really going to stress here, I think a lot of people always think of the end project, the end technology that they use, because that's what we're used to, right? We're used to downloading a Microsoft Office or downloading whatever application or service that we're used to. And ultimately, we don't really think of the people behind it. And these people, typically in the open source world, are giving their own spare time just because they're passionate about that project and about that topic. And I've seen recently on Twitter, for example, some areas where maybe the love isn't quite felt, I think, in the open source community. So I've got to remind people about that before we jump in the discussion, that be kind to your open source maintainers and contributors, because they put in a lot of effort for what we get out of it.
Absolutely. And to yes and that, one of the core things that I try to talk to people about this whole subject is specifically scoping your project. One of the things that I saw time and time again, I have a couple slides if people want to see those too. But I'm one of those types of people that just literally has just like, and don't ask me for these slides because they're absolutely useless. You need to hear what I have to say around it to make it make any sense. But generally speaking, scoping your project is one of the hardest things for an open source project to do, because occasionally they start pulling in everything and anything, or they just do something so small that it becomes a little widget. Yep. And then all of a sudden the squishiness around the project of all the humans dealing with it become actually more of the problem, and it becomes more of a social experiment, more so than actually writing code. So scoping your project is so vital to understand why you need to do what you are doing. And to play off of that, one of the most important things off of scoping your project is understanding that open source isn't just throwing your stuff up on GitHub. How many people I've talked to, how many corporations I've talked to that are just like, hey, JJ, like, turns out we're not using this piece of software anymore. Turns out a couple enterprises use it for, whatever. We're thinking about open sourcing it and like throwing it on GitHub and open up in a wiki. And we'll let the nerds come and deal with it. It'll be fine. We'll Apache 2 license it. It's fine, right? And I literally stop and I'm like, whoa. That's not how this works. Have you ever been to a meetup before?
Yeah. Chris? Yeah. I actually run my own one. Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Well, actually, this would be even better then. So when we were allowed to like see humans in face-to-face form, of course.
Yeah.
When you started that meetup, throw random numbers out for me real quick, which was how many people first showed up?
Yeah, you get the low numbers, don't you? You can get as low as like even 3, 4, 5, it can be minimal.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden, maybe in a couple months' time, you get a little bit more word out, people start showing up, and then there's another little drop off, and then sometimes it goes higher, sometimes it goes lower. It's inconsistent. And then, of course, every meetup has that one person that comes in that is usually the frictionful person that all of a sudden makes some other people disappear. And it actually mirrors an open source project really, really well. Right. Because when you start a project, if it scratches your own itch, great, that's awesome. But if you're trying to build something in the open, you have to sell it all the time. So just like a meetup, you got to get people to show up to do the work for you and work from there. And it became a really great analogy to understand how to deal with the human squishy side of all of the different things.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I like that analogy with the meetup community. And there's something that struck me in what you said, and it's so simple, but let's really pull it out for people, right? Open source. just digest those two words, because I think we always forget and just blur it as one word, and it's just a thing. It's open source. But open source, taking those same concepts, taking those same ideas that we used to of development and, working with other people, actually collaborating, not having that friction against each other, trying to come together, with all those good DevOps principles and things we're used to, being able to share our knowledge and actually build something awesome, going back to the awesome word. Those same principles apply. And I think, just echo what you said there, you really need to think about
that. So there's a nice little, no, I don't think it's a law. I think so you've got like Moore's law, right? Or you've got Murphy's law. There's the not such a law. There's something a little bit closer to a law but isn't a law. What's the term? An adage? No.
Not like a theory, but a
yeah, it's between a theory and a law.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying, right? Well, whatever that is, in the open source community, there's one of those, which is open source is like getting a puppy, right?
Okay.
Like you can get a puppy for free, but you've got to take care of it. You've got to feed it. You've got to make sure it grows in a safe environment, and you've got to take care of those things. Open source is not free. People say that it might be free. They might say that it's free open source, but whoever is saying that doesn't fully understand the responsibility of what an open source project is.
Yeah, for sure. I think you look at people like Linus Torvalds and all the work that was done there with Linux, for example, and then some of the various foundations along the way. I guess a lot of people these days have heard of Cloud Native Compute as a foundation, but there have been many foundations before that, like the GNU Foundation, for example, and many others. And there can be, what's the best way of saying this? There can almost be drama along the way as well, depending upon how those projects are maintained, right? Because if they're not well maintained, and if there is some of that chaos almost, then it is going to introduce that friction.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
And to play off of that, the one of the next slides I have, if you want to bring this up real quick, is that on the flip side, as being a leader, you actually have to have empathy for your audience.
Yes.
It's really, really hard when to run a project or be involved in a project and not understand who your actual audience is. There's a lot of projects out there that people just throw their software up on GitHub, pick Apache 2, MIT, or one of those rather permissive licenses out there, and they just want to, for lack of a better term, show off their goods, right? And they don't want to ever take a PR. They don't ever want to do it. But the irony is some of those projects are so good and people want to grow off of them, but they just shut those things down. Like they're benevolent leaders that are just like, no, I don't want any of this. This is my little baby over in the corner. Leave it alone. So you need to spend a moment when you put something out there to realize, hey, if I put it out there, you never know who's going to use it in whatever way.
Yeah, no, 100%. I want to give a good example of that, actually, the flip side of where it's worked really well, actually from today. So an interaction I've been involved in today. So my website, Cloud with Chris, I run that using Hugo. So Hugo, for anyone who doesn't know, I talk about it tons of times, but in case this is a new episode you're listening to, Hugo is a static site generator and very much an open source project. Got a brilliant community around it. And one of the things I've been on a bit of a quest myself is making my website more accessible. So screen readers, all of those types of things, making sure that no matter who you are, where you come from, what your background is, you can view my content, you can engage with my content. And something I found was actually when you put code snippets on the site, they are not screen reader friendly. So it was kind of interesting. I was like, right, let me just break this down. Where is the problem? Right, it is in how Hugo goes and generates this stuff. So raised an issue over on GitHub. And I think within hours, so, counting for time zones and everything and people's jobs, etc. So within hours had an answer where someone responded saying, oh, this is already raised in this issue, which fair enough, my bad for not spotting that one. So I take that one. But also they've put that in a pull request and it's this pull request. And this wasn't the maintainer of the project who responded. This was someone else supporting the community. So that's awesome thing number one. Awesome thing number two, obviously they closed my issue down. Great. But that original pull request then gets approved within a matter of minutes from that comment coming in and merged. So that is now actually part of the code base. And nice. I know I didn't write any of the code or anything there, but it's just, again, showing that kind of use case where it does work well, that actually there's this community that come together to support the furthering of that project.
Well, hold on, Chris. Don't sell yourself short there. By you raising the issue, identifying the problem, and being involved in the conversation, you have committed to that. You haven't written code, but you have committed to that project.
Yes.
That issue you opened gave that moment as you were part of that community and a voice in that community. So don't sell yourself short. You are now involved in the Hugo project. Yeah. There's this weird mentality that people have saying, well, I want to start open source. I want to be involved in open source, but I don't know how to code.
Yep.
Like, I mean, I've been doing this for my hand's over here. I've been doing this for going on 20 odd years now. Right. And I am a horrible developer. Like I'm genuine.
I think I join you on that one.
Yeah. I'm an old sysadmin, right? Like I have a bunch of servers behind me. They're actually over there, and up and down on the machines. But anyway, the point being is I can run servers, but you asked me to write some software from scratch. I have no idea what to do, right? I can write it in like 6 different languages, but I don't know what to do. Yep. Now I say this because the way I've learned to be part of open source is actually getting started guides. You'd be amazed. You'd be genuinely amazed how many people or how many projects just don't have a very good getting started guide at all. Or because the developers and the people who've been involved in it for so long have blinders on. So they only see what they know. They don't have that new first moment of like, hey, I pulled your code down or your application down and it didn't work. Like I spent like 3 hours trying to understand how to compile Go. Why am I compiling Go? This right? That's not like something good. So if you take those notes of you learning how to do that and just push that up into the repo, you'd be amazed on how many projects will just start drooling to be like that first moment, because all of a sudden creating that getting started guide allows them to iterate on that, which allows them to grow the community, which gets more eyes in front of their community, which gets more people to use it, which finds more problems, which in turn makes it a better project, which in turn makes it to do other stuff, which makes them be able to work onto something else. It's a wonderful snake that eats itself.
Absolutely. So there we go. We've solved the problem. Done.
Yes.
But no, I think
Exactly.
It's the classic thing, though, isn't it? Where as a developer, you want to kind of develop, you want to write code, and you've written that code, and you've got more ideas, you want to keep growing the beast, and you don't often kind of do that thing where you just stop, look back, and go, oh, hold on, there's actually people that now want to go and use this thing. How do I make that onboarding experience better for them? And I am not surprised from seeing some developer documentation at all. That is probably a not optimal experience, I'll word it that way. But yeah, I think lots of opportunities for people to get involved. And, you know, point taken, I'm a big advocate, and I've written a blog post on it myself about open source is more than just writing code. So I need to listen to my own advice, I think, as well. So touche there, touche.
There you go.
Excellent. So yes, empathy for your audience then, I think we were talking about before I kind of sidetracked us a bit.
Yeah, I do want to just throw this next slide up if you don't mind. So if you take the empathy and the building of like your meetup, believe it or not, I live in Austin, Texas. You might not know, but Texas is normally relatively hot. There's usually some rather warm weather in Texas. And that's why I'm trying to be funny.
No, I had heard. It was a little hotter than here in the UK.
There you go. So I was on a conference call with a rather large corporation who actually told me, "Hey JJ, I want to open source this project I want to throw it up on GitHub and open up a wiki, and I want this is a direct quote, I want the nerds to come do the work for me." And I was staring out my window, and there was a park just a little bit farther down where I was staring, and I was seeing people pick up trash. And all of a sudden, it clicked with me.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? Turns out running an open source project is a lot like a trash pickup. Now, specifically in Texas, it turns out you can't just be like, hey, put a flyer up in your neighborhood and say, this Saturday we're having a trash pickup, come and help. Turns out you actually have to do a lot of logistics around it. You've got to get a permit for it. You've got to make sure that you have water stations. You've got to have trash pickup locations. You've got to have communication between the volunteers. And especially, and I'm going to reiterate, you've got to have water because people will dehydrate and pass out. And obviously the city doesn't want that, right? So when I was thinking about that, and I thought about all the things you had to do this trash pickup, and then I thought about the person I was talking to on the phone at the same time, because, you know, conference calls, your mind wanders. I realized that he was trying to pass all all these he was trying to pass all this logistics off onto the community.
Yes.
And I was like, nobody cares about this stuff.
Nope.
They're not going to be there. They're there to pick up the trash of your code.
Yes.
So you need to get this approved by your OSS, your open source security office, or whatever they call it now.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to go through that executive to get that done. You've got to go talk to the lawyers to make all that happen. Nobody who shows up to help cares at all about any of those stuff.
No.
What they care about is making your code better or using your code to scratch an itch for them. So it was it's another great analogy off of that meetup to understand that as a company, as someone who's trying to open source something through a company, for instance, all that logistics, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Nobody cares at all.
I love the analogy because I think the analogy in terms of people solving a different part of the puzzle definitely holds true into the open source project side of things as well. But it also talks to their attitude of open source with that particular individual you're talking about. And I think, they are quite literally, just to really bring it full circle, what you said, they are treating open source just as rubbish, right? They are not seeing the investment in open source that they really truly should do. And I think that, on the face of it, you can see is not going to be a successful project because they're not invested in its success. They don't care enough. They don't care about building that community and nurturing that community. So therefore, why will people come? Why will people spend their spare hours in their evenings going just cleaning up your code because you can't be bothered? I know I wouldn't.
Well, interesting you said that, Chris, because the next most important thing you need to do as a leader is celebrations. I might have a narrative in these slides. I don't know.
I'll help you along with
that. No, perfect. I love it. So in all seriousness, though, celebrations is one of those things that you absolutely have to do as a leader, as part of the open source communities that you're involved in. You need to celebrate everything and anything because, as you said a moment ago, nights and weekends, people are coming there to help you out. And they need to know, they need to understand that what they are putting in is valuable to you as the leader or the people involved in the open source project. The celebrations can be anything ranging from version 1.0 has been released, to that matter, version 0.01 has been released, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Anything and everything should be celebrated.
I think I'm just going to jump in again with my story from earlier. Here we go, and talk about this issue here. So just to not to prove or anything, just to kind of showcase the celebration angle. There's the issue I raised, blah blah blah. Here's what the duplicate is, etc. And I think it was on the PR where I commented. Let me just check here. There you go. Even I think the point I'm going to make here is, you don't have to be the leader to do that either. You can be someone in the community recognizing what the leaders do or recognizing what other contributors do as well. It's not just about the figurehead, I think, is a better way than saying leader.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And one of my favorite quotes from a friend of mine, Major Haynes, he works at Red Hat,
cool.
But he was actually at Rackspace for a long time. Whenever he had PR come to one of his projects, he's the guy or a gentleman who ran ICANN has IP.
Yep.
If you've ever used that, yeah, he was the one who created that.
Okay.
He lives in San Antonio. I've had many privileges to have beers with him. He's brilliant man. And I still remember one of the best quotes he ever had was, "Hey JJ, so whenever I get a PR in that I can't merge for whatever reason, I have a template that I use to ask people in a polite way of saying, hey, I can't merge this." He doesn't write, "Sorry, I can't merge this. It's not out of scope," or whatever. He always worded it in the phrase of, "I'm sorry, but your awesomeness is something I can't take right now because I'm not ready for it."
Awesome.
And yeah, it was just such a great way to describe, he was acknowledging that the person spent X amount of time, where it could have been 5 minutes, it could have been days on that thing. And he recognized that they were truly awesome to spend that time for his project. And I internalized that after hearing it, because the people that I worked with in the other projects I used, it was amazing to to hear that and to leverage that way of speaking to to the people involved. And anyway, I'm babbling.
No. It's awesome. It's awesome. I love that, and I think we can take that positivity with us, not just obviously in this open source kind of context we're saying here, but I think in interactions in general as well.
Absolutely.
So I guess then we're talking about the celebrations side, but I guess we also need to recognize there's not always going to be those celebratory points.
Absolutely. And the next step is you absolutely need to acknowledge your defeats. As an open source project comes along, hopefully they don't happen very often, but occasionally security issues happen.
Yep.
People downstream are leveraging your code, and it turns out you put an rm/rf inside of your build script, and you nuked your bin directory.
Yep.
That's probably not a good thing.
Not
right?
ideal. No, that's not something you want to do on a daily basis.
Exactly. So you never need to obfuscate your defeats away. If anything, you need to own the defeat and learn from it. There's guardrails to be able to make sure you don't happen again. Testing is a perfect example of it. Spend the time building a framework for testing around it to catch those defeats. I realize it's a lot of work, but as soon as your project has gotten off the ground and people are starting to use it, it's your responsibility to own the defeats and work forward to make sure that they don't happen again.
And I don't think that's any different to when you look at the cloud vendors, right? Because we in technology, a lot of us now know cloud. We know that it's built on internet technologies. We know that it's built for scale, so we know things are going to go wrong. It's not a case of if, it is a case of when. And the same case here, in software development, when none of us are completely infallible and perfect, we are going to get things wrong. We are going to write bad code at some point. Something's going to happen. And the worst thing you can do is not communicate that and not, as you say, not own it. You need to kind of share that out with the community. So if they are impacted, they can deal with that. And I think that's becoming ever more present. I think one of the examples that stood out recently, I say recently, it must have been a year ago now. Time has merged and blurred with COVID, everything going on. But the PHP code base was actually, there was a vulnerability because it was hosted on a insecure Git server, I think, from memory. And what they did was they took that eventually, I think, to GitHub, if I remember rightly. They migrated it in the end. But again, vulnerabilities were introduced that way. And again, they were very transparent and said, look, this has happened. This is what's happened. Here's what we've identified and spotted so far. Here's what we're doing about it. And here's long-term mitigation. We're sorry, our bad, and owned it that way. And I know that's obviously the extreme end of the scale there, of course, but I think any interaction there is important, as you say, to own it.
Absolutely. And just as an audience member, as someone who might be affected by some of these problems down the line, remember there are humans on the other side of this.
Yes.
And I have seen grown humans break into tears because of the personal attacks that sometimes the community around the project can be so frictionful. Let's use that word.
I'd even go a step further and say toxic in some cases as well. There's so many tweets I've seen pop up of just the things that people will say, like, I won't say them live on stream, but, things that just individuals are putting in writing, like in a string of GitHub issue comments, because someone isn't going to prioritize their issue or, can't fix this in a certain amount of time. And I don't stand for that.
Exactly. And that hopefully building your community, you can find a way to have a COC or code of conduct, if you haven't heard that term before, around it to make sure that you can make sure that you have some protections. But don't forget also, there really are humans on the other side, and open source is a passion. And I'm sorry that sometimes you take risks in doing things, and sometimes your business relies on portions of it. And I mean, it's still humans, right? Like, they have open source out on Mars right now. You
Yep.
know, like if open source can work on GitHub, right? It's next to impossible to get a PR to put in. By the way, don't do the getting started thing. It didn't work for me. I joke, but no, I don't. But again, there were actual humans out who've written software that are out on working on Mars now, and you have to realize that there are anyway. There are humans.
Can
on
I
the
say,
other side.
JJ, I would love to read the Getting Started guide for flying on Mars or getting on Mars. Like, I think I just await the creativity that will be in that Getting Started guide.
Install Kerbal Space Program first. Yep. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Build rockets. Okay, check, done. Yep.
Exactly. Done.
Excellent.
So if you don't mind, I want to just kind of highlight some successful traits of some open source projects that I've seen consistently.
Sure.
Through the different projects I've been involved in over the last 20 odd years, and the first one is so obvious, and hopefully it'll just be like, JJ, why are you even bothering bringing this up? But it is the hardest one, and that's trust. Yep. The as soon, like, as we talk about the human squishiness side of a project, as a leader, as a community member of an open source project, you have to trust that everyone is trying to do the best that they can with the resources they have, and trying to make the project the best they can. You cannot assume malicious intent almost ever, because you don't know. One of the biggest problems, especially that I saw in the OpenStack community when I was really involved there, was the Western ideals against the Eastern cultural changes.
Interesting.
And yeah, like the differences between the Western and Eastern cultures and how things were done and how people involved themselves. There were genuine human problems when I had I'm obfuscate a lot of things. Sure, I'm not going to get too far in details, but a Westerner who had some personality differences. Okay. Let's just put it that way. And working with an Eastern team, and they never saw eye to eye. And I remember that Westerner coming to me being like, we need to just stop working with this. Like, that we need to stop working with this team. They don't understand what's going on. This is frustrating. I can't seem to get across to them. And I went to being a mediator, yep. Between the two teams, because I was the leader for that project at the time. Sure. I realized it was just a cultural difference of this Westerner was assuming this type of thing. He did not trust that the Easterners had best intentions. They just couldn't bring their communication style forward to be able to make that make sense. It's a bad example, but it happens more often than you can believe.
No, I'm completely with you, and it interestingly relates similarly, maybe on a perpendicular way, but stick with me here, is it relates to an episode that I did recently with Melissa Jurkovic. Jurkovic. She talks a lot about dimensions of diversity and the fact that if we all come from the same background, again, things where I think sometimes we can take for granted, but really pulling it out, if we all come from the same background, we have that kind of group think, we have that same mentality, and we don't get the best experience for everyone. So I think the fact that you were able to recognize that is really awesome. The fact that these were all, coming from the same, from different backgrounds, but had good intentions and just trying to bridge that gap so they can move on. Because I think the worst thing in that scenario someone could have done is, the one side wanted to do was kind of cut the other side off and not have that open and inclusive environment there. So it's a great story and a great use case scenario.
Thank you for that. And it's almost like you're seeing my slides, because the next one is accessibility.
There we go. You can pay me later.
Yeah, there you go. And seriously, this is great. I really like it. But in all seriousness, off of that same story, we originally started our project where we used Google Meet on a weekly basis to have face-to-face conversations, because at the time we were having some struggles with, making sure people were on task and whatnot. And leveraging the accessibility of the project, we realized that as Westerners and as a predominantly English-speaking team, we were leaving out a whole demographic of people because they couldn't. First of all, there's this firewall in China that kind of stops you from using Google Meet, which is kind of problematic when you have engineers in China, and all throughout that region. So we were leaving a whole portion of the team behind. So we ended up learning. We moved to IRC, believe it or not, like not Slack, not Discord,
awesome.
but actual IRC.
Wow, retro.
And it was because at the time Freenode hadn't imploded. And we just hopped on IRC. Turns out IRC, because it was normally in plain text, the firewall let it through, and we were able to have 30 or 40 more people be there. Yes, they had to use like Google Translate to translate what they were trying to say into English because the majority of people spoke English, but we were able to get more engagement asynchronously using something like IRC specifically, which was just amazing. It really truly was.
Awesome. And I think there's even another angle from that as well, like something that sticks with me. I went to KubeCon maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I forget how long ago now. But I remember one of the things that they were talking about in the keynote there is thinking about the future of the Kubernetes project, how they evolve it, how they, again, make it more accessible. And one of the things that was kind of floated as an idea, and it was an idea rather than something, yes, we are decided we're going to go down this path, is do they not rewrite, sorry, that's the wrong word, but do they start using other languages for the code base? So something like JavaScript, for example, where there's a huge amount of developers that can go and support the project end and, again, open up to more potential contributors to the project than there are with Go, for example. And I know obviously Rust is starting to appear as well. So again, it's interesting, even thinking from the real basics that sometimes people don't consider is the actual code itself. Coming back to your point earlier, you don't need to be a developer to contribute, but even if you are a developer, do you even know that language? Can you contribute into that? Is it accessible to you? Is another angle as well. So it's interesting when you start thinking about accessibility.
Absolutely. And the last final one I want to bring up, and this kind of ties back into what I was originally, when I kind of opened this whole conversation with, is the other successful trait that I've seen with every single project is a genuine, clear vision.
Yes.
Believe it or not, Chris, I'm gonna say something pretty controversial for a moment.
I'm braced. I'm ready.
Okay. You might get bored of the project you're working on at some point in time, right? Like you, especially if you're a leader, right? It just might grind you down because for whatever reason, maybe you're not even part of that project anymore in your upstream company, or it turns out you really just don't care about, fonts anymore. I don't know, whatever. It's like, I mean, there are open source fonts, of course, but the idea is that you need to have a clear vision so you can hand it off to someone else, right? You can trust that the community will successfully continue moving forward and be successful. But you can only get there if you have a clear vision and the scope of your project is correct to what you as a leader or as a community member think this project should be doing.
Yeah.
And it's so surprisingly complex when you actually sit down and you pour yourself a nice drink, whatever you choose to drink, and you stare at some trees for a little while and think about it. It's surprisingly hard to do.
I've been reading recently the book Measure What Matters. I look up because it's in my shelf of books above me here. And it's interesting that the clarity that book's given me thinking about things like for my own podcast, for example, like on the face of it, people might think, oh, Chris has it all really well kind of structured. He's got some great guests that come on. It all seems to follow a kind of a pattern, etc. And some of that is luck. Some of that is a little bit of planning. But I've read this book, Measure What Matters, and they talk about OKRs, objective key results, for anyone that doesn't know. A number of companies have used them. Google uses them. I think the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has started using them as well. And it's about setting that kind of vision of why you're setting down a certain path, and then the key results of how you actually know you've achieved that or measured that. And for me, that's something that's really helped me. I don't know whether a lot of people use it in the open source space. Maybe it's something that people might think of start using, but that for me has really helped with the podcast. I've now got the clarity as I move forward, what the things are important to me, and growing the podcast and making sure it's useful for my community. So couldn't agree more. I think having that clear vision, it's easy to say we need a clear vision. It's harder to figure out what that clear vision is, even, 15, 16 months on my own journey with this, but it's something I think we all work towards for sure.
And I have a final little question that I like to throw up to the audience when I talk about them. And hey, honestly, is it even worth this hassle?
That's a great question.
Well, whoever I'm actually speaking to, whoever's actually watching this and doing it, if you've gotten this far, maybe. But the actual answer is it depends. And this really it really has to be like as every great senior developer says at some point in their career, oh, it depends, right? That joke of you never get a straight answer.
Any good consultant as well. That's first in the consulting textbook. Yep. Exactly.
So you have to identify yourself. Are you going to be able to sit there and go through some of the gotchas that we talked about, or are you? Will that excite you to deal with these very interesting problems that are not code related?
Yeah.
Because every successful project requires these different things to deal with, and it's something really important to really end kind of your journey on discovering if this is worth it or not. And for me, I mean, obviously it is worth it to me because this is what I do day in and day out, right? Like I've spent my time and I've built my career around open source, and I'm privileged enough to have IBM pay me. Like, it's a privilege. I know it is, to get paid to do my coding all in the open and being able to help communities wherever I can.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that if people want to go down this path, it's not easy, but if you can get there, it's one hell of a payoff.
I think you can even take that question not just in kind of open source, big bubble kind of thing, but look at it on a project by project basis as well. Like what you mentioned earlier about having the trust for the community to kind of go on with a project you've started. At some point, you're probably going to have to ask yourself, do you have that time and energy that you really want to focus on that project? Because things change and it's okay. And if you feel that an open source project, or any project for that matter, we can extrapolate, is all on your shoulders, I'd say there's a problem there. I'd say there's probably a challenge there that needs to be looked at. So I think that question can work in a number of ways. So it's a great, great question.
Thank you.
Excellent.
So, but that's all the slides I had.
Cool.
Just kind of keep the conversation going. But is there anything else I can answer for you?
No, I think that's a really great session there. I think, looking at the journey from, it really has been a journey, hasn't it, that we've talked about, even bringing in some real life lessons from just today and bringing those in is awesome. I think what would be good maybe as we wrap up here is maybe your kind of closing statement or closing thoughts. If you had to kind of boil everything down that we've talked about here into almost maybe one or two lines, what would that be for you? What would you want the listeners to take away as this is the main piece from the session here?
Simply said, anyone can be involved in open source. You need to decide if you're willing to work towards the goals of the project, or if you need to find a different way to do it yourself. But realize that everyone who's involved has the best intentions, and there is true success inside the open source communities.
Excellent. Very, very well articulated there. I'm very impressed. JJ, excellent. Thank you so much for a brilliant, brilliant session there. Lots of insights around your own experience contributing into open source, leading these communities, and I think a lot for people to digest and take away here. So thank you so much for joining and being here today.
Chris, this was amazing. Thank you so much for this too.
So there we go, folks. We have learnt all about lessons learned from kind of cultivating and growing these open source communities. And I'm sure you'll agree, plenty of insights there. And I think many of those insights we can take away more broadly than just our open source communities as well, and think about some of our daily interactions in other projects we may work on. So lots of insights to be shared there. So you know the deal. If you've liked this episode, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe so you know when there's other great episodes coming out as well. And hit the notification bell so you're notified as soon as they come out. And of course, it's not just all about YouTube. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and cloudwithchris.com. And on cloudwithchris.com, you can go ahead and listen to the episode and read the transcript in real time as well. There's also some blog posts up there as well, and you may not have spotted, I've actually recently written a blog post all about CNCF, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, and I'm planning to write about all the different projects that are up on CNCF as well. So that'll be a longer burning series, but really getting some focus here on the open source side of the world as well. So if that's of interest of you, take a look and let me know, because I can make sure to prioritize. So with that, folks, thank you for listening and watching today. Stay safe. Stay healthy, and until the next one, bye for now.